Hey everyone, you're listening to the Alex Files. I'm Alex.
And I'm also Alex.
And we are back, episode 8. Feeling great. Feeling great. A weight has lifted. We see a light at the end of the tunnel with this vaccines being rolled out. By the time this drops, heyo, who knows? I mean, I think all of us in this great golden state are going to be like getting it in our arms. That was teed up in a wild way. Your face. Okay, heyo.
I mean, when in Rome, when in a pandemic, I can't wait. I'm in line. I'm in like 2 different lines. And then on the 15th of April, I'm going to be in like a 3rd line. It's going to be great.
I'm so excited. It's going to be, there's baby steps, but it's nice that there's something hopeful to look forward to. Oh man, we're shifting gears again today back to our files. We've got lots of things in the cabinets. As we said before, we'll never run out of things to talk about, so don't you even worry.
Never, ever.
Never, ever, ever. We are going to be kind of thinking on therapy and our experiences, which is such, a big topic. And I think oftentimes folks think about therapy as being one thing in particular, sitting on a couch, talking to your therapist, but there's so many different types, and it's definitely shifted in the past year, given that we can't really gather in person to have those experiences. So we're just going to take a deep dive and share kind of our experiences, what's worked for us, what hasn't, the different kinds of therapy. And, if you're thinking about it, I don't know, maybe we can help you think a little bit more because there are some real positives to it.
I think everybody can benefit from therapy. I'm just going to say it. I think anybody and everybody could benefit from it in some way. I love therapy. I love it. I don't know if that's weird to say. I don't know what kind of connotation the general public has these days on therapy. But when I think of therapy, I think of healing and growth and opportunity and help and ways to cope. Though it's not always easy. Therapy can be difficult and uncomfortable, and maybe not the right type of therapy. So there's a lot to explore. How do you feel right out the gate about therapy, Alex? When you hear the word therapy, what do you feel?
I feel like therapy, and we'll get into the different types of therapy, but I've only gone to one type of therapy in my life, and then a second fold is that I've only seen the same therapist my whole life, which is very rare.
That's amazing.
I'm so just really lucky and grateful to, I feel like I owe a lot to therapy. The experiences in my life, I don't think I could have gotten through without it. And it hasn't been one thing that is consistent. Like there have been times in my life when I've like taken a break and come back to it. But I just feel so, so grateful. And I can't imagine going through the life that I have without it. And I know that it's not something that, and we'll talk about this maybe more, but it's hard to access sometimes given like how expensive it is or just like lots of different things. So I think keeping that in mind as well.
Yeah, that's something when I was thinking about this in preparation, I was actually getting really down about that, thinking about the past and how, difficult and inaccessible it can be for a lot of people. And then
Mm-hmm.
thinking about how it's shifted in kind of in the modern day and also during this pandemic that has made it more accessible, which is something that we can talk about and is really exciting and great to see. So, um,
Yeah. So when, we're talking about therapy, big capital T, what are we talking about when we talk about this? Because this is such a broad term, an industry, like, maybe would love to hear kind of the sleuthing you've done on these different types. I know you've certainly experienced and done so many of them firsthand.
I have, yeah. And I mean, the ones I'm going to mention, I mean, there's even more different types and breakdowns. So these are just kind of the top couple of types of therapy that are out there and that I have had experience with. The first one I think is something that you think of commonly, which is talk therapy, psychotherapy through talking to a therapist. And of course, a lot of therapy does involve talking, but there's different approaches to it. And one form of talk therapy is called cognitive behavioral therapy, and that kind of focuses treatment from the top down, meaning we're going to start with the brain and our thoughts to kind of retrain our body's responses and emotions and how we feel. So that is something that I started off with first. And what I loved about that is it really teaches you how to be aware of your negative thoughts and kind of rework them into positive, affirming statements that you can work with. Uh, the second type is dialectic behavioral therapy, or third type, sorry. And that's kind of in conjunction with cognitive behavioral, and it works in the opposite way. It works from what we consider the bottom up. So
Hmm.
we're going to work with changing our emotions and behaviors to help change the negative thoughts. And that's the one that really worked for me the best. And it's pretty scientific, and there's a lot of steps to it, and it's really used for people with kind of severe emotional dysregulation and disorders like phobia, panic, bipolar, borderline personality, or suicide, harmful thoughts can be really effective for that. Another type of therapy is called EMDR, which stands for eye
Hmm.
movement desensitization and reprocessing. And that is maybe some of you haven't heard of, but it's been around for a while, and it involves um, eye movement. A therapist will move fingers in front of you. You follow that. Sometimes there's audio clicks that go from ear to ear, and also tapping to tapping, and that is used to kind of process traumatic and difficult emotions. And you use that, um, process that happens when you dream. You move your eyes, and you're hearing things in different ears to kind of work through those memories and bring your emotional state down.
Hmm.
Then there's other things that are not as formal. When we think of therapy, I think of also things that we can do on our own, things like dance therapy, art
Hmm.
therapy, and even, like I mentioned, tapping. There are a lot of theories about different ways to tap that help relieve emotional pain. So lots of different types. And again, I didn't mention all of them. There's different iterations and concepts and ways to approach this psychologically. So with
I feel
that,
like, oh, I was just going to say, this may be, I think, I don't think it's specific to the Bay Area, but I know there's definitely like people who are doing some like psychedelic like therapy
oh
where,
yeah, oh
folks
yeah,
kind of will like, it's like very guided and controlled. But that's definitely a thing, I think.
totally. I've heard about that from multiple people who have trauma and panic disorder, and I've heard that there's like islands where you go and like this shaman leads you on this journey through hallucinogenics and different types of drugs that help release certain parts of the brain that are carrying these, and you work through it. And
Hmm.
there's actually a lot of books and research behind that. So that's, I think, a very valid thing out there. I don't know about that myself personally. Uh,
There's so many ways to kind of access it, which is interesting because I think so often we think of it as one thing, just kind of stereotypes of what therapy is, or in the past, maybe how it was perceived.
Yeah.
How were you first, like in your life, how were you first introduced to therapy?
Um, uh, I was brought to therapy when I was like 10 or I think 11, and my parents were getting divorced. So it was kind of like they brought me there thinking that this would help, and there's some difficult stuff going on. There was some other stuff going on outside of the divorce that maybe I was brought there for. And I remember him. His name was Steve Young,
Hmm.
and it was downtown, a couple of stories up, and I remember these sounds they put in front of the door so you can't hear what people are saying, this white noise, very good smelling. And we went in there. I really enjoyed it because it was safe and fun. We played games, we drew pictures, and through that, we had conversations, and the therapy took place in a way that as a kid I wasn't sitting there being asked about my emotions. I was working through them and being led through them through these exercises with another person. So I found that very helpful and enjoyable. Uh, what about you? When did you first experience therapy, and how?
Yeah. So my mom passed away when I was 6, sort of nearly 7, like, 5 days away from my 7th birthday. Because of course you remember something like that when it
Yeah,
happens and it's major and it's so close.
of course.
And then I think it was a few years later, I think, or maybe when I was 8 or 9, um, I was taken to therapy in a similar way that you were taken to therapy as a kid.
This might help.
Um, yeah, here you go. And I think it was through like a family friend recommendation. I will call my therapist Katie because this same therapist that I was introduced to is someone that I currently see now, which is truly wild because it's like, over 2 decades later. If
That's
I'm
amazing.
I know, it's really crazy. So I remember going to her office, and the memories honestly are a little blurry because I was so young, but I think similarly it involved like probably like drawing and playing games and things like that as a way to kind of work through the loss of my mom. I remember though feeling like, this is a huge thing that happened, but like I didn't want to talk about it. And the times that I did, it would be like I would just cry a bunch, to like the kind of crying where you're like hyperventilating and
Yeah,
you're like, oh, I'm
inconsolable.
yeah, it's a lot. Um, but and then when my dad remarried, my stepmom, I definitely like going to therapy was a huge part of that, having lost my mom, and sort of doing the blended family thing. But it was so useful. I didn't realize it at the time because it was so painful and hard. But yeah, I don't know how often I went, but there was sort of a tradition to like go to therapy, go down the street and like get a scoop of ice cream or get a
Yeah,
frappuccino, because nothing like taking your kid to get like a frappuccino
that's
after
so
it.
awesome.
I know. It was like, when you're so exhausted from crying, you're like, I need a thing.
Yeah,
Um
it's good
and
self care.
yeah, and it was like how it can be so often in life, no matter how old you are, like it's work. And so it felt
Yeah,
like, okay, I'm a kid, I'm going to school, I'm doing, your like dance, like art class, like whatever, band practice, whatever thing you're doing, and then I'm going to therapy. It's like, oh, it's like feels like homework when you could be hanging out with friends, but in the long run, it's been so useful.
yeah. I think therapy definitely can be like homework, especially when you're really working on it. And certain therapies have like homework, like DBT or cognitive behavioral. And, you know, I kind of like that as an adult because it makes me feel like I'm actually working towards something. There's something in front of me and real and tangible. But yeah, as a kid, you don't really necessarily get that. But I'm glad that it was enjoyable. And I like the reinforcement of the ice cream or something after. I think that's super important.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely in the beginning it felt not enjoyable. It felt like very hard and like I cuz I don't know, I think it was, there's no like right amount of time, obviously, to like go to a therapist as a kid after your mom has passed away, but I think it was helpful to have some buffer between when my mom passed away. Because it's just like, it's all so confusing. And yeah, in the long run though, like looking back, it was so useful. And I think too, like, having like new siblings and a blended family, like all of that was such a shift. So it was helpful to kind of work through that and be able to kind of just in general like learn how to express myself
Yeah.
as a human, and how
Yeah.
to talk about feelings.
Yeah, I think therapy helps you discover or refine parts of yourself.
Hmm.
I think that can be really beautiful.
Yeah. In your experiences with therapy, like what have you found that works for you? And then to counter that, like what hasn't worked or what's kind of been like, oh,
Um, I've been at it for a really long time. So ever since, I went when I was 11, I've been in and out of therapy and I'm now 33. So I've been through a journey and I felt for like a really long time that nothing really was working to the level that I had hoped. And I felt still very um, unhealthy and unhappy. So the first thing that finally really turned the page after literally like 15 years of like
hmm,
working on myself, going to different therapists and different therapy was DBT. And therapy is not a one size fits all. It takes some time to know what's going to be right for you, and it also takes time once you're in that to like work through the stuff. So DBT was my life savior because it actually for the first time taught me things that I could do during panic attacks or during really uncomfortable situations that was like a result of the trauma. And I didn't find that talk therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, ever really gave me skills to
hmm,
deal with it. We just talked about it, and they'd always ask me, well, why did you faint? Why did you pass out? Or why did you? And it's like, I don't necessarily know. So for me, I had to start with working on the body and the behaviors and the emotional regulation to get
mm-hmm,
to be able to figure out those thoughts. So I remember in my 20s kind of realizing that the therapy I was in and the therapist I was with, it really was not helpful. And I had,
hmm,
been going for years, and I kind of felt this sense of like, I'm going to therapy. Like, okay, I'm doing it, but nothing's really changing. And that was kind of a huge shift in movement of realizing, one, I'm just kind of coasting and not progressing, and two, that I need to kind of stand up and find a better fit and a better therapist and a better type of treatment for me. And leaving that therapist, it's uncomfortable and weird. um I don't know, you just think you're doing the thing because you're going, but really you got to push, you got to work. And yeah, so I think that answers the question. um
totally.
What about you? What worked for you, and then did you find things that didn't? And how did you like discover that?
Yeah, I would say because my memories of going to my current therapist at a young age are a little blurry when I was young. I know it was a lot of me just, I mean, and now looking back, I know my therapist has said like you are able to communicate now in a way that you couldn't when you were little, like
Oh
because so
yeah.
much of the time, especially
Wow.
in those early years, I was just like I'd just be crying or I would just be silent. Like it was not, there would, and if I
Yeah.
tried to say something, I couldn't because I was like, again, doing the like, oh, like I'm not like the laughing, but like the crying where you can't get a word.
Hyperventilating.
Yeah. So I found that, when I don't think I went to therapy in high school or college, but when I was in college, there were a couple moments where, especially senior year, like I remember my one of my roommates who's a really close friend, we were out one night like coming back from a party and something came up for me and I got like really sad about it, and I think I mentioned like my mom, who had passed away like years and years ago, and she didn't say it in a mean way, but she was just like, have you ever thought about like going back to therapy, like it could be helpful now that like all this time has passed. And I think at the time, because, walking back from a party, it's like bringing that up is a lot, but
not
not the greatest time, but but it stuck with me. And as soon as I graduated and moved back to San Diego, I started seeing the same therapist again, and we had a lot to catch up on, but it was so useful, especially in that post-grad days and kind of figuring out how the choices and behavior and choices I was making in my certain behaviors and sort of like where I was and who I was as a person were so impacted by this like major loss that I had at a young age. And I think that, and I saw my therapist in person, but when I moved back to the Bay Area like almost 5 years ago, this was pre-pandemic, I started seeing her just over like Skype. And again, it was like putting in the work, and even if like, like not just seeing her when things were like really bad, but making it a point to like consistently see her. And it made all the difference. I think that I couldn't have gotten through the loss of like losing Phil a couple years ago, which is crazy that that was a couple years ago. But like I texted her, I don't know, I think the night that he passed away or the morning after, just like this, probably just like, this is what happened. This is what I know. And like, I just need to let you know, like over text, like we had that kind of relationship because we'd known each other for decades.
Aww.
And she just reminded me over text, she's like, just 1 minute at a time, like keep breathing. And I remember she said something like, you got this, like, she didn't say like it's going to be okay, but she was like, given everything, like you can do this, which was so helpful because and she was right, like everything that I had, like all the work I'd done with her and losing my mom, it sounds maybe morbid, but it had really prepared me to work through the loss of Phil in a way that I don't think I could had I not lost my mom.
Yeah.
And done the therapy. So yeah, I think just like, it's never going to be like, it's so hard to find the right person. And I know maybe I'm not the most like legit person to say that since I've been seeing the same person that I was sort of sent to at a young age. But when you find the right fit, it's really everything. It's such an important relationship, and I think can be so helpful.
Yeah. So something that you mentioned, I think I really resonate with too, is like, you didn't go to therapy in high school and college, but then as an adult, you started realizing how the loss from your childhood affected you in ways as an adult. And that's a very similar experience I had. I thought I was gonna, in my 20s, I went to therapy because I wanted to get over my phobia and I wanted to be able to take care of my body and do things. And I didn't realize how much of that was connected to things in the past, and it just continued to spiral. So, I don't think therapy is something that's like a one-hit quit. I think that's something that is always there for you to come back to, and I think that's healthy. And at the same time, I also really appreciate therapies that have a structure of, recovery, where there's this kind of expectation of, you will be okay on your own for some time, and you might need to come back to therapy, but there's going to be a point where you will overcome and cope, and you won't need to come as much. I think sometimes therapy can have this connotation of like, you're stuck in therapy for the rest of your life, you never work over it. But really effective therapy, you do get to these points in your life where you don't feel like you need to go or want to go. And
Totally.
revisiting is also super healthy and effective, and there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I think that's great and a really good like way to maintain as we evolve and continue to deal with loss and things that are difficult.
I know. I mean, because at the beginning when I was little, I had no concept really of what therapy was, or maybe I vaguely knew, but I was so small. But then, yeah, I was like, oh no, I'm stuck in this. Or even, when I was back in San Diego as a 20 something, I was like, I'm just going to have to go like every single like week forever and ever. But it really is, you again have to put in the work, which is way much easier said than done. And it can shift. Like maybe you take a break for a couple months, or maybe you see your therapist once every month. It's really whatever works for both of you. And I think it's finding that right fit.
Yeah. That can be challenging and daunting. And the only way you're going to know is if you try. And when you go into it knowing that this is not going to be a home run every time, or maybe it will be, and just opening yourself up to the experience and whatever could come your way. And I think following your gut,
Mhm.
you don't have to just accept the first type of therapy and therapist that you see. If there's something that after a few sessions that just in your gut doesn't feel right or not a good fit for you, that's okay.
Mhm.
Um,
Are there things like from maybe through your experiences or how you felt going into your first type of therapy, like whenever that first introduction was, like how have your perceptions of therapy changed, and kind of what are they like today, and what do you think, I mean, there's so many, but what do you think sort of the perceptions of therapy are kind of now?
um, I think when I went into therapy as a kid and even, as an adolescent, I had that kind of one kind of giant umbrella of therapy. This is therapy. You talk and you talk and you talk, and then you still kind of feel sad. And that's therapy, but you're talking. And so that's good, right? And then as an adult, I realized there's so many different ways, there's so many different types and methods and approaches,
Mm,
um, that, it's not an end of a hallway. There's just so much to it that you can um, use as a resource. And I think my understanding grew and my perception grew with like my understanding of like all of these different types of options, and I'm like fascinated by it and I think it's amazing. um I think culturally, I think therapy, as a young kid, we were kind of coming out of a phase of like it's really taboo, there's a lot of stigma. If you go to therapy, you're troubled, you're unhappy, we don't talk about it. And now I'm seeing therapy is celebrated as what I believe it should be, which is just important for maintaining your mental and physical health, and
mhm,
making it less um, extreme. Therapy is for everybody, and it can be. Unfortunately, it's not accessible for everybody. That's another conversation. But the context of therapy can help everybody, and you don't need to be ashamed or feel like you're not as good or this or that because you enjoy or could benefit from therapy. So I've always enjoyed it. I like the structure that it provides. Sometimes in a really dark place when therapy is kind of this one thing at the end of the light where you're like, okay, I'm going to get up and go and do this, and this is going to be good for me. And at the same time, therapy can leave you really raw, like really raw, as you know, and that's also really tough. But um,
yeah,
yeah,
I know. I feel like there's such I mean, and it's in the past, I don't know, however many years, like 5 or 10 years, it seems like the stigma around therapy has sort of shifted. So, or the taboo about like
yeah,
going to therapy, like folks are way more open and talking about it. I mean, there's, so many different types of therapy, like even in terms of just like, I don't know, apps where you can like talk to a therapist. Like if it's something
oh,
that,
I love that.
trying to make it more accessible, you hear it on like ads for other podcasts, like head, I don't know, whatever I don't know. There's one type of like talk therapy that is accessible to folks, which is great. But I think that, yeah, like you, I always just thought it was this one umbrella of like talk therapy. I didn't really know about the other types. Honestly, probably within the last 10 years was when I realized like, oh, there are all these different types of therapy.
Yeah,
And I think that I don't know, I never really felt like weird in sharing that I went to therapy with other people who kind of asked or things like that. But I know that for a lot of people, it's such a foreign thing and it can
yeah.
be really, really scary, which of course it's something new and different and something that has had this whole stigma around it. Because I think if you say, oh, she's in therapy. Like it elicits like, oh, like she's in trouble, like watch out,
Is she
be
okay?
sensitive. Yeah. And I don't know, I guess that was never um something that I experienced, but it was more, I think, after my mom passed away and with Phil too, like, but especially after my mom died, like as a kid having to bring up in situations where it's like, oh, make sure like your mom signs this permission slip. And it's like, oh, I don't, okay. Like having to
Yeah.
bring that up. And then over time in college, people ask about your family and, yeah, just bringing it up and, having to also deal with like the response of other people are going to react in a variety of ways when you tell them about someone you've lost, whether it's someone who passed away or is still around, but you're just not close with them, or they've fallen out of your life. It's not the person you know. So I think kind of bracing myself for that. But the therapy part of it, I've always thought was like, yeah, just such a great tool in whatever form
You
it
know
takes.
what? I didn't mention group therapy. That's a thing. I've been to it. It's amazing. That's also a thing.
Yeah.
That's a big part of DBT. Part of the therapy is that after your individual session, you go to a skills learning um, group session.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've also been to Al-Anon, which is like a free group therapy thing, where there's a lot of different types of groups, and
Yeah,
putting yourself in somewhere where you're not alone is kind of powerful.
totally.
Like, wow, I'm not alone with this. I'm not crazy. There's other people having this experience.
I think the not feeling alone and not feeling crazy is such a refreshing feeling because it can be so isolating. That's how I found the Hot Young Widows Club like online group
Yeah.
was so useful in that first year after losing Phil because it was like, I mean, in a lot of cases, I wasn't really posting to the group. I was just even to observe and read through other people's stories and posts in situations that were far more different than mine, but they at least got it. Like I could be in that space and sort of be amongst them in a way that like talking to a therapist, it wouldn't really fill that gap in my life.
It's different. It's different
Totally, because
because
they
they
get
can
it
share.
firsthand.
Yeah, they don't have this like I have to be professional. I can't share about my life thing, but they can
Mhm.
like share and hear stories and be like, wow, they can do it. I can do it, and wow, I'm not alone. Or like, you know,
And those with anything, whether it's loss, whether it's addiction, whether it's an eating disorder, like some sort of trauma, having folks that get it firsthand and all those like awkward things that feel like questions that you even with like the closest family and friends who have the biggest hearts, like they just won't get it. Like you have to have a space where people get it and you can ask those questions or raise those things that are like frustrating because they're in the same boat.
yeah, and especially when you're going through something that can be so stigmatizing and isolating, like grieving, addiction, an eating disorder, or dealing with a severe emotional dysregulation like bipolar. You
Hmm.
feel so alone and like outside of like existence, that getting in a room, I'll never forget just that first feeling of looking around and just not feeling less than, or not feeling it's a powerful experience. Yeah. I'm preaching to the choir, reiterating
No,
my,
it's
but
so
yeah,
it's
it's
so
like
refreshing.
it's it took me a really long time because it's also really daunting too. Like, I'm gonna go in front of all these people I don't know and talk or like listen or even just like be in the room. It took me a long time to get to that part of self discovery. But
Yeah, being able to share and own your story, you know?
yeah, it's tough, saying things out loud, writing them down in a journal. It's like making them real. And when sometimes we hide things and we carry them internally, and there's a lot of shame or just fear of admitting that this is what's happening, and talking out loud, like to a therapist, to a group, to a friend. It can be cathartic and powerful and helpful.
yeah, just to get it out. Um, because
Yeah.
the longer it's in there, it just over time is like compounded and can show up in a variety of ways that you might obviously like not even notice.
Oh my God, yeah, behaviors, body illnesses, relationship problems. Yeah, and through therapy, taking a look at those things and wondering why I'm so unhappy, it's amazing to see how it can
Yeah.
affect you if you let it stay in. And sometimes we don't mean to, you know? Sometimes
No, no. And,
sometimes we
you
don't
know,
know what to do with it. So,
yeah, taking a step back and talking to someone like a therapist or using all these different types of therapy that you've mentioned, I think is a great way to like get some perspective and
and
realize some things.
reading books on the subject and things you've been through and the topic has been really helpful. It can give you terms and information that validate your experience because, you know, maybe someone said you're crazy or you're over dramatic or you'll grow out of it, and you were none of those things. And you read a book and someone finally explains to you what you're experiencing. That's a huge healing moment too. And then
Hmm.
you know where to go from there. Okay, this is a thing and this is why, and now here are the things I can do about it. I think that's really powerful. And dance therapy, I recommend
Oh
every
yeah,
day. I
dance
recommend every day dance therapy.
dance therapy, it's great. And you can do it wherever. I mean, it's perfect for a pandemic because you can just do it, you know?
Yeah, it's really good, and no one's watching. Just move
No,
your body and let it out. Head bang, whatever you need to do. It's
just like, in the words of T Swift, shake it off.
shake it off,
Shake it
shake
off. So I kind of want to wrap it and think, about given your time in therapy and what you've taken away, things that have been useful and not so much. What advice or what would you say to someone who's like maybe on the fence about going to therapy and whatever type of therapy that is? Like, what would you say to them? They're like, I don't know.
it.
For
Well,
whatever reason, because I do know too that like there's also like the issue of therapies. It can be very expensive.
yeah. That's why I mentioned books because books
Mm-hmm.
are less expensive. There's a lot of workbooks that therapies recommend that you can do. You read, you do these worksheets. So I think step one, if you're thinking about therapy, is think about why you want to go. Are you suffering? Are there things you want to work on? Are there symptoms of something that you're experiencing? Kind of hone in on, why you want to go and what you need help with, and then do some awesome Googling and just look around at these types of therapies, read about them, how they work, what, where they are, and decide, what what would be a good fit for your needs. Are you feeling depressed? Are you traumatized? Are you struggling with an eating disorder? There's a lot of different specific types of therapies for specific experiences. So, sit with yourself, figure that out, do some research and see what interests you, and then obviously it's going to be limited to accessibility. So if that's something that you don't have access to, I would look at things like books, workbooks, and also online um, apps and websites. And therapy like that is a great way to start kind of dipping your toes in and see what is working for you.
Yeah, I
What about
think
you?
like looking, well, and again, can't directly speak to this, but just through seeing friends and family, like try to find therapy fits. If you're looking for an in-person maybe therapist to do talk therapy, checking in with a couple people that you feel safe with and comfortable with about like if they have any recommendations and maybe reflecting on who you are. Like, are you a person of color or are you a woman? Like, do you want to look for therapists who you feel comfortable talking to, who are also like people who look and will get you in a way that like not every therapist will. I think that's also a huge part of like deciding on who is this person I'm talking to. And it's not going to be like, it's similar to like so many relationships, like going on dates. It's like your
Yeah.
first date's not going to be like maybe in some cases, or like in, a Lifetime movie, like it's going to be your person, but a lot of the times you really have to like work for it, and you got to kiss a couple frogs, and hopefully you're not kissing your therapist, but
Just feel it
um
out.
just feel it out. I think too, and I know that being on social and being online, as we've talked about in previous episodes, can be very overwhelming. But I feel like there are so many tools for connecting with other folks who are going through similar experiences, whether it's, in different apps, or accessing, you know, certain people to follow on like Twitter or Instagram who have a space that you feel comfortable in and safe in, or, whatever, these traditional sort of group therapies like Al-Anon, like ways that they've had to pivot amidst the pandemic. I'm sure there are so many. I think it's just kind of sleuthing and asking around and doing some research. There's so many things that are free and accessible to so many people, because at the end of the day, like, this is a bigger issue, but no matter who you are, it's always helpful to talk to someone, or to like go through um these therapeutic like tools, whatever they are, not just talk therapy with someone.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm loving to see the accessibility grow because it's really frustrating, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that I've had to have health insurance to help me facilitate that.
Totally.
And I know that not everyone has that opportunity, and I think that's uh, not good. And I appreciate the rise of these more accessible apps and websites, and also things like Facebook groups and communities
Yeah.
online that support each other, and like a safe space, like you mentioned. Those are incredible, and like group therapy, but online.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think, of course, there are pros and cons to any sort of community gathering in the pandemic, but I think that the virtual side of it is that it's a lot more accessible. There are folks from all over the world who can gather in these groups in whatever form they take, whether it's a Facebook group or a website or an app. And, if you're hesitant or a little scared about sharing it, it may be easier to share because, you're doing it in this sort of virtual world. And I think that could be a really like positive thing, because you never know like what connection you might make. And I
Yeah,
think that can be a real good thing too.
yeah, and it's a good safe way at your home to like dip your toes in and just explore that. And you know just like a reminder, like therapy is going to be uncomfortable. Even if you're like excited to be there, it's going to be uncomfortable, and that's part of the process. So um it is a little bit of a leap of faith and outside the comfort zone, but that's where the growth happens, right, baby?
Right,
So
BB? Yeah, you gotta feel uncomfy to like feel that glow up later on, honestly.
for
Yeah.
sure.
It's like there's so many times I remember, like in my early 20s doing therapy, or the past few years, where I'm like, I would much rather like go home and just chill and like watch Netflix, or go meet up with friends at a bar. And it's like, nope, gotta do therapy.
Yeah.
And you know what? Maybe in, the moment, it's like anything. Like the hardest part is showing up, but you gotta show
Oh,
up. You
yeah.
have to show up, and honestly, it is so worth it.
Yeah, and don't expect to just show up and just, have magic happen. You got to show up and try and push and do the homework and talk about the things that maybe you don't want to talk about, and explore the things and look at yourself in a way that you're not used to. It's going to be, you know, it is therapeutic in that positive sense, but it also is work to get to a different place in your body and your mind. So, but the beautiful thing is that it's possible. It's
Totally.
possible to retrain our brains and our bodies, and we don't have to stay stuck in whatever situation we're in. We can learn to cope and thrive. That's what
Yeah,
I love about therapy. It's like
yeah,
gives you that tool and that awareness to make those things true.
It's always good to have options, and you have to put in that hard work to, as you said, make that magic.
Ah, man, I have a whole binder from DBT, and there's like daily diary cards I had to write out, all these homework assignments, and like I have a whole binder thick of the whole year work that I did, and multiple workbooks filled out, cognitive behavioral, codependency no more, like all of, I mean, it's a journey, and it's kind of never ending, but that's okay. I'm just climbing higher up on my mountain, higher towards self-realization and happiness, man. Just boom, boom, boom. I don't need to plateau. I'm always going to want to grow, and things are going to be thrown at me that I'm going to need to learn how to grow with, you know?
You're climbing the climb.
It's the climb.
That is Miley Cyrus endorsed. Well, she probably would have a lot to say. Anyways, this has been really helpful
Therapeutic?
to hear. Yeah, really, this has been really therapeutic. And I hope it's been therapeutic and useful for folks who, I mean, now more than ever, I think that mental health is something that is at the forefront, given the year that we've all been through. So I think it's a good time for some self-reflection. And yeah, I'm just really grateful for my ability and accessibility to be able to do therapy. And I think whatever that looks like for anyone listening or anyone out there is great.
Yeah. And even if you're just thinking about it, that's the first step.
Totally. To have that thought is a big thing.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you all.
Wow.
Wow. Thank you all for tuning in. We're ramping up. We're getting closer to episode 10, but don't you even worry about it. Don't freak out. We've got a lot of content to cover. Some dust has gathered, so we're going to have to brush it off, get into those old files. But thank you all for tuning in, and any parting words, friend?
I love therapy.
I love lamp. I love therapy.
Episode 8.
Episode 8.
Feeling great.
Don't be late to therapy. Feeling great.
Don't be.
We'll see you in the cabinets. Bye.
Bye.